We are live.
Ready?
Yep.
All right, we're live. My name is George Atallah, the NFLPA. Welcome to the second episode of Inside the NFLPA. The first episode, we sat down with the executive director of the Trust, Bahati Van Pelt. Today, I sit down with this man, the executive director of the NFLPA, D. Smith.
DeMaurice Smith, great to be here. Wonderful opportunity to go live talking about the things that we have going on in the NFL Players Association. First and foremost, happy to be off the road, all 32 teams done in about 10 and a half weeks. So great last meeting in Jacksonville, great young leaders who are going to be leading that team as union members, but always good to be back home right before Thanksgiving.
So you spent 11 weeks on the road. You did multiple flights, trains, planes, automobiles.
Yep.
You and another colleague of ours, Don Davis, are in the unique position of having seen literally every NFL player in the last 12 weeks.
Every player.
What's happening in the locker rooms?
You know, I think this year's been different. I don't know whether it was the issue of the protest starting off in preseason, or whether the culture or environment of the election primed players to be far more engaging, asking a lot of questions, challenging, which is great. But a great opportunity to be on the road to really engage our guys. Also, it was an election year for every rep.
Yes,
so the way that this union runs, we are a player-led union. And we actually ask players on the team to serve as union reps. And that is always a very interesting process where I'm no longer surprised by it. The real leaders of the team emerge. And I know our fans think that certain guys are leaders, but it's fun to walk into an election year, give guys an understanding about what the union really is and what the work of the union really is. And then the names start coming out of the gallery of who they nominate to be their union reps. And generally they actually have to vote. It's a vote where we have to make our results available to the NLRB. But it is something that every player and every team takes seriously. And you know that when somebody nominates somebody as a joke, or somebody nominates somebody that the team wouldn't think would be a great leader, and almost by consensus, that person doesn't even make the ballot. So yeah. It's a great opportunity to watch our democracy in action.
Well, speaking of our democracy, this is an opportunity for us to explain to folks how our union works.
Sure.
And the leadership structure is important for folks to understand. And I always try to tell people, look, we have an executive committee, you're the executive director, which essentially means you're responsible for our operations and our staff.
Correct.
But how does the interplay between our newly elected player reps, player leadership, if you will, our player executive committee, and you? People don't,
sure.
I think there's this disconnect
of how it actually works.
Exactly.
And to be just bluntly simple, every team elects 3 player reps, and there's one player rep who's actually authorized to have the vote for his team. He's the vote giving member of the team. There's 2 alternates in case anything happens. There are a couple of teams where the vote was so close between the alternates that we took both of them. That group of approximately 100 players then elects an executive committee of 11 players. I serve on the executive committee as well. But that executive committee doesn't vote. That executive committee sort of serves as sort of an ultra subset of the player reps, where if we have to get work done during the year while our guys are playing, or is something critical, we do that. The other role of the executive committee and the president, however, is to really provide the board with long-term strategic vision.
Exactly.
So you can say long-term when you've got a guy like Adam Vinatieri on the executive committee who's played for 20 years. But when you look at those 11 players on the executive committee, they are truly those group of player reps that the 100 reps decide are special. And their job is to not so much look at things from an episodic standpoint, or from a year-to-year standpoint, or even from a team standpoint. I remind the executive committee that a few years ago, the same guys sitting where you guys are sitting now woke up one morning and Gene Upshaw, who had been the head of this organization for longer than most of them had been alive, was dead. And it fell upon a group of 11 relatively young men to try to figure out who's going to lead the union in the face of a lockout and for the next decade. So that's how our union operates. And from a very democratic standpoint, the board votes on everything from our budget to what positions we're going to take in collective bargaining. I don't apologize for making their job tough. I think my job is to provide guidance and direction, but I force our guys to take on really hard issues with very difficult, answers, and that's what a union is.
Well, and speaking of issues, again, having been to every single locker room, the issues that you guys talk about in the locker room are often disconnected from some of the things that, frankly, I have to
Sure.
see in the headlines.
Sure.
If you had to pick out kind of the top 3 or 4 issues that players are concerned with, that they raise during the team meetings, that they want to be engaged on or get more information about, what would you say some of those issues are?
Yeah, I think, if I had to pick sort of disconnect issues, obviously take an issue like guaranteed contracts, for example. And, from a media frame, it's always a overly simplistic discussion among sports writers about how come we don't have guaranteed contracts
Sure.
in the National Football League,
Sure.
as if my job is to snap my fingers and voila, guaranteed contracts. But very few people actually dive beneath and into sort of the analytical realities. One, injury rates have an impact on that. But when we talk to our guys about it, and we start to raise these issues about what it means to get something through collective bargaining, and some things that are achieved without collective bargaining. Something like guaranteed contracts is a perfect frame. I mean, very few players probably understood that when it came to NBA players, for example, free agent players had a huge impact on on guaranteed contracts in their business. In the NBA, the first round players' contracts are guaranteed by CBA. There isn't another guarantee provision in their collective bargaining agreement. So when you look at the comparisons between our collective bargaining agreement, where virtually all of our first round picks have guaranteed contracts, their collective bargaining agreement, where all of their first round picks have guaranteed contracts, when you look at the NBA and you see that virtually every other player in that, you have to ask yourself tough questions of, okay, how did the rest of the players who aren't first rounders get guaranteed contracts in the NBA when we don't have them in the National Football League? And so you get to engage in a history lesson about free agent impacts on the market. When we're in our locker rooms, we talk about the potential impact on the salary cap of guaranteed contracts and the issue of dead money, which virtually no sportscaster covers, right?
No, that's true, and we've gone to great lengths, as you know, to try to explain to the general public and the media about the differences between both sports and why it's an apples to oranges comparison. But it highlights the fact that none of our guys are really sort of giving it that sort of macro attention or conflict type attention that we see in the media.
No, the issues that we're fighting over and the issues that dominate the discussion. We have the best benefits plan in professional sports. So talking to players about how virtually every one of them can go back to school free of charge to get their college degree, graduate degree, or some sort of degree in a trade is a big deal for our guys, because they all know that most of them will be out of the National Football League in about 3.5 years. Yep. Injury care is a huge issue. And again, the disconnect. Everybody talks about lifetime medical. Well, in our business, healthcare post-career is a part of your compensation package. And you get 5 years of post-career healthcare if you vest as a 3-year player. But that's money literally off of the salary cap. And that's money off of the player's share of revenue. So yes, it would be very easy to add 5 more years of health care. But the question then becomes, if you're taking $50 million a year for every year of additional health care, is it smarter to do that or make sure that our guys have access to workers' compensation?
Exactly.
Which is what every American gets if they are injured at work.
We've got a question from the Peanut
Sure.
Gallery. Our good friends Louis and Stephanie, who are producing this Facebook
Great
Live.
job, by the way, guys.
Yeah, really.
Oh, thanks.
Awesome. You look great from that side of the camera.
We got one question that asks, why is there a shortage of talented quarterbacks?
Why is there a shortage of talented quarterbacks? Well,
I guess, one, you're happy to ask any NFL quarterback that question. My guess is you'd get a different
maybe an answer they wouldn't want to hear.
Probably not. Look, I don't... I know that the greatest part of this job is working with the best athletes in the world who are also very good husbands, fathers, sons. The flip side of it is I don't really spend a whole heck of a lot of time walking into a locker room and saying, why is there a shortage of quality quarterbacks?
But it does dovetail into an issue that we've seen pop up in the media, and
Right.
this is a great actually forum to talk about it. You've seen sort of this creep of the CBA is bad for player development. The CBA is bad for player development, and the shortage of quarterbacks. You do have a group of people, the old football folks, who say the 2011 CBA really damaged a young player's ability to develop and have time in the offseason and work with coaches. So I think there is sort of this underlying theme for why that question may have popped up.
Yeah, and look, the reality of it is the players themselves made decisions on how their offseason should be structured. So if you have 2,000 players who were in a system pre-2011 where there was virtually no offseason, where they couldn't guarantee that there was time for their bodies to heal, where coaches were making them do things called opportunity periods, where even after the regulations ended, where the regulated time period to have a practice occur, coaches were making players come back out on the field.
We saw some gruesome injuries out of that, too.
We saw several players in their careers thanks to opportunity periods. Not one of the coaches or GMs that are now complaining about player development lifted a finger to change that system on their own. Not one owner, not anyone from the National Football League did anything to protect a player who was virtually practicing all year round. So players made the decision to change the system. The beauty of our system is every team has to comply with the same issue. And nonetheless, every year, there just seems to be a team that wins the Super Bowl. And there always seems to be a handful of teams that, for whatever changes in the system, seem to do pretty well. So, if the owners want to talk about changes to the offseason, that's not going to be up to D. Smith. It's not going to even be up to the executive committee. Any change in the offseason is going to be voted on by the player reps, and we'll see where we are.
And that goes exactly back to the structure and why it's so important for these young men who take up these leadership positions in the locker room. Those are the types of things that they will be discussing and talking about as things progress or not on certain issues in the NFL. The other thing I wanted to touch on today, as you were on the road, you saw this sort of interesting discussion about television ratings. And our players, as you go through and you talk about the economics in the locker room, you say, okay, we get 55% of TV guys.
Right.
So this is something that was a red flag for all of us.
Sure.
And what's the context of how you talk
That
about
plays
that in the
out.
locker room? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, our team meetings last about an hour and 15 minutes. Every member of the team is there. Again, I think it's part of my job to force a conversation that steers our men into the things that matter, and probably none of it has to do with the game of football, unless you're talking about something that they want to bring up. The ratings thing became a great foil to talk about the economics of our deal. We had an old deal where we were facing a tremendous amount of revenue erosion, primarily due to the way in which owners were utilizing player money in the form of stadium credits. We changed our deal to not only have a floor on that, but also we took certain buckets and different percentages of buckets. So we get 55% of television, we get a different percentage of properties, and a different percentage of stadium.
Right.
So, the TV ratings issue and issues such as the Raiders moving to Las Vegas, or the inability of the Chargers to move to Los Angeles, became bookends to talk about the economics of our deal. So the ratings issue is important because we get a tremendous share of, we get the larger share of revenue from television. But it raised the question of, do we have confidence in the National Football League to make sure that we are maximizing our revenue in the area of television? So that led to questions about how we audit teams and how we audit revenue, and our questions about, are we making the right decisions about television or the future of media in the way in which players are going to take in our game. The other bookend is, of course, stadium credits, and this is a deal that is vastly different than the deal in 2006. There's a floor, and once you reach the floor, the league doesn't get to use any more of the player share of revenue as a way to invest in stadiums. Did that have an impact on the Chargers' inability to move to LA? Yes. Is it a factor, I'm sure, in whether Mark Davis makes a decision to move or want to move to Las Vegas? Yes. But that's the deal. And for us, we have more of a control now on how player money is invested in stadium, and most importantly, when that caps out.
Question coming in.
You actually just addressed it. It was asking how slumping ratings and the viewers affect the
Oh, look at that. I stepped right. It looks like I have the little Facebook Live in my every now and then I get one right. Exactly. That is true. Other issues that have popped up in the locker rooms that we've heard, again, outsized importance publicly, but not necessarily something that takes place in the locker room.
A great example. You hear all these questions, and I saw some of the comments from some of the coaches about how the new CBA is somehow impacting injuries and
that's also
and things
true.
Like that. And my only response to that is, one, when I see something like that comes across the transom from a coach, my only thought is that coach gets less injury data than we do. I mean, the irony is in the National Football League, the union gets virtually all of the injury data from the National Football League. That coach's his boss doesn't trust him with the same injury data that we get.
So, all the coaches are lining up to invite you to Thanksgiving on Thursday. That's all that's in my head.
But so the reality of it is, if we are looking at the quad-trial data and looking at trends of injuries, looking at when they occur, how they occur, where they occur, in support of the coaches, I would love to have the coaches have the same data that we do, which is all of it. My only thing is, it's hard for me to come out and really spend a whole lot of time thinking about a comment about injuries when I know that you get less data than we do. So that said, a lot of talk about the new CBA. Well, one of the things that's come out of the injury data over the last 3 years is I do believe now that there is a statistically significant difference between the number and percentage of injuries that are occurring on grass and injuries that are occurring on artificial turf. And so if we really want to have a intellectual conversation about this collective bargaining agreement and player safety, I think I know that we will, the player reps in this league are going to take on the issue this March about what do we do about data that seems to demonstrate that our players are safer on natural grass.
Lewis, we got another one.
Yep, from TDB1155, he asks...
TDB1155.
Yep. Have you ever thought of creating a committee for fans to have input, one fan per team rep? There might be some interesting ideas put forth along with more collaboration between fans and players.
I'll be dead honest with you. I've never thought about it, but I actually think that's a great idea. So
maybe they can do like a send in your best touchdown celebration videos if they want to get those views.
Look, I think from a fan standpoint, and if only we had two really, really talented, gifted social media people who now work for. Oh yes, what do we have? Look, TD1155. You've just tasked these two people with creating a virtual fan rep base, and I think that's a great idea. I mean, I would be interested in what fans are thinking about new media. How do they feel that the games are whether they work with being interactive or not? How do they feel about things like touchdown celebrations? What do they think about issues of player health and safety and fantasy? So no, I think it'd be a great idea to have a player rep per team, and a way for us to get the information from you.
Good. We have like 3-4 more minutes to go here.
Actually, an hour and a half.
We're already 22 minutes in. So.
We're 22 minutes in. Okay, so we got a couple more things here. Let's have a little fun as we wait for our next question. Best Thanksgiving side.
Dish?
Yeah.
The yams. My mom makes the best yams on the planet. So the combination of the sweet of the yam with salty of the mac and cheese. I'll be right back.
Exactly. This is just a mind trick.
We're leaving. Exactly.
Close the office down for the rest of the week. No, but Thanksgiving week is actually a tremendous time to talk about players and their contributions off the field and all of the good work that they do in the community. We have obviously highlighted throughout the season the community MVP. We're going through the process of having players in each locker room nominate the player that they think is most worthy of the Byron Whizzer White Award, which is our highest honor as a union. That goes to the player of the highest excellence on and off the field.
Named after a Supreme Court justice.
Absolutely. So I think it's good for you to share some thoughts about the tremendous contributions that players are making to their communities, and frankly, in the context of all of it, social justice.
Yeah, it's been a year.
It's been a year.
Well, look, and I think that is where there is a thankful, at least for my job, thankful disconnect between the entertainment game part and the humanity of what it means to be a responsible husband, father, man in your community. And so whether, when you walk into every one of these locker rooms, when we start off our team meetings, the first card that's on all the players' desk is the community MVP Byron Whizzer White Award. And you see, what I love is there's always at least 10 guys, 12 guys in that locker room who are doing something sustainable and important in their communities, and you get votes from 60 players that range between 5 to 10 guys. Well, it's not like you walk into a locker room and only one guy is doing something that's important. It's wonderful. And I know that, our state of media today, that you get a heck of a lot more clicks on something that's related to an arrest or a drug test or something like that, and that the soft glow from community service doesn't rise to the level of burn and slash media. But you know what? That's a happy disconnect that I'm fine to have. And it's the job of our communications department to get out what our players are doing. I just think that's kind of where we are as a culture now. Yep. That it's just more sensationalistic to rely on stuff that is going to happen, or stuff that does happen that's not so good. But for the men in our locker room who have committed themselves to being stand-up guys in their community, and there's too many to name. That's something that I'm happy to live in the world where there is a disconnect between the sensationalism of what folks want to write about and who our men are. I'll take who our men are any given day of the week.
And then we'll close with Thanksgiving memory, favorite Thanksgiving football memory. Can you think of a good one?
Well, I grew up in this town, and there isn't a person, I'm 52 years old, so there really isn't a person under the age of 50 who doesn't remember Clint Longley and Dallas playing Washington on Thanksgiving Day, where I think Danny White or Roger Staubach get knocked out of the game, and an unknown quarterback named Clint Longley comes onto the field and brings the Cowboys back from, I think, 2-3 touchdowns down and ruined every Washington Thanksgiving. And the irony is, and I was also the last one to know, I was at the game this weekend and realized that matchup is occurring again on Thanksgiving Day.
Thursday,
so
that's right. You'll see plenty of highlights of that.
Oh yeah, clearly. You could pick up the phone and call my dad now and say the word Clint Longley and just hear the screams. But that's fun, right? I mean, those are the memories that I had of thankfully, being a fan of the game in this area as a young kid. And every now and then, something like that, especially my parents are living with us now, something like that is, that Thanksgiving is going to be sort of a quick train back in time, right? And those things are cool.
Good. Well, it is Thanksgiving week. We want to thank everybody for tuning in. It's
Happy
been
Thanksgiving.
Another special edition of Inside the NFLPA. We'll be back next Tuesday with a special guest. And I'll tell you what my favorite Thanksgiving memory is, but I'll let my dad tell the story. That's a good teaser for you.
That's a good teaser.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in.